Hi there, welcome to the Johnny Jenkins Show this afternoon. Well, we're at the end of May, Friday the 29th of May today. I hope you're well. I hope you're keeping yourself busy and concentrated and focused, but also enjoying this beautiful weather, which I've had here where I am in Essex today. And I wonder if you've had it where you are too. It really is a glorious day just looking out of the window there. And we would now be quite deep into term three, wouldn't we? I suppose we are in a sense, but just a very different term three to what we're used to. I've got a fantastic panel joining me this afternoon, and we're going to have a chat about how their term three is going from home, the sort of things that they're doing at home. Obviously, they're studying, essays, perhaps online exams. I'm interested to know how they're working and if they're finding studying at home just as effective as perhaps going to the library at university. Also, trouble is brewing in America, big protests, and the latest person to wade in is the president, Donald Trump. And he's in a bit of a spat with the social media giant Twitter, who have labelled some of his posts as misleading, as fake news, to coin a term from Trump. The president says he's going to regulate against these social media firms, but can President Trump regulate against the firm that made him who he is? He is, of course, the Twitter president, and I'm interested to see how he'll respond to this. The test and trace system in the UK was rolled out yesterday at 9 a.m. It means that if you've been in contact very recently with someone for more than 15 minutes who's had coronavirus, then you could be called up and told to isolate for 2 weeks and get a test. It's all part of the government's efforts to reduce the spread of this virus, but also, I suppose, in a sense, to start easing lockdown. It's going to become very important when we're out of this or coming out of this, because, of course, we can't stay in this lockdown we're in forever. I'm interested to see what the panel think about the government's way of easing us out of lockdown, if they think it's effective or perhaps they think it's all a little bit too late. We'll see what the panel think about that. But of course, the one story that has rocked the country this week is the Dominic Cummings saga. We know, don't we, that the Prime Minister's chief advisor drove from London to Durham in the northeast of England with his wife, Mary Wakefield, a journalist, and she was symptomatic of coronavirus at the time. They drove there, spent some isolation time there in Dominic Cummings' parents' house, and then also had this peculiar visit to Barnard Castle, which is a market town in the northeast of England, a 30-mile trip from where Dominic Cummings was staying. He says it was to test his eyesight to make sure he was safe to drive. I wonder if the panel think that's a good way to test your eyesight. We'll see what they think about the Dominic Cummings drama. I know it's been discussed much a long time, but we'll talk about it a little bit more. We've got a shout out in the comments. Hello, hope you're well. Hope you're having a lovely afternoon. And if you're not watching with us live, then hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever the time is. Thanks for watching with us today. Right then, it's time to meet our panel on the show this afternoon. Let's begin by saying hello to Misha. Misha, good afternoon.
Hi there, Johnny. How are you doing?
Yes, very well, thank you. What have you been up to?
Well, just this week I finished my dissertation, which was my final piece of submission that I had to do for my course. So I'm essentially out of the university game for now in terms of academics wise. So now I've just been sorting a few things out at home and trying to figure. Well, I'm now in the position of everyone else who doesn't have a main source of distraction for keep them occupied during this period of lockdown.
That must have been such a weight off your shoulders.
It was a big relief, although this is one of the things I was doing for my dissertation was exploring this play, The Normal Heart. And the day after I submitted it, the author of that play, Larry Kramer, passed away, unfortunately. There was a bit of a kick in the teeth in terms of coincidence-wise.
Oh, that's really a bittersweet situation for you to be in, of finishing it and then, yeah. Oh, well, it is good to talk to you today, Misha. I'm sure you've got a lot of thoughts on the topics which we'll get to shortly.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, let's welcome in our next panelist, presenter here at Raw, who presents his very own show, which you may well have seen, Cam Hall. Cam, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Johnny. I'm doing very well. Hope you're doing well yourself.
Yes, very well, thank you. I'm enjoying the beautiful weather. Have you got sunshine where you are?
No, I say it's very nice here on the south coast. And I've got to say, normally looking out from my house, so I can see the Isle of Wight. It's just literally just over the water from me in the Solent. But I think one of the weird things about coronavirus when we talk about pollution levels going down around the world, I never normally get such a clear view over to the Isle of Wight and over as well to the Spinnaker Tower, which I can see from my house. And it's just absolutely beautiful views at the moment with the sunshine that we've got. And I wouldn't say a silver lining of coronavirus because obviously it's absolutely horrible, but a potential way for us to see in a world with more environmental controls, just, seeing a world without pollution is very nice, definitely.
Yeah, perhaps that's something we can take out of this. I live very near an airport, and it's nice not having the planes fly over. Also, I live by the seaside as well, and you go and you look over, and actually, everything's so clear. You see these parts of the world which you've never really properly seen before.
It's very nice, definitely. I think I've really appreciated not just more of like the local environment where I live, but more in general. I think just how much I can be doing that little bit of difference, seeing through this, just how much we've changed and how much we've adapted our lifestyle in the last few months. It's really made me reconsider a lot of my situation. I think that's something that I will take from these few months that I've had in lockdown, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, at the start of all this, the thought of having to do your isolation for a week or a fortnight was seen as something so impossible. And of course, it is a very difficult task. But having spent a lot of time indoors over the past few weeks, I feel almost if I get that call, which I'm sure we'll talk about, I would feel more ready to go into isolation. Well, Cam, good to talk to you. Let's bring in our next panelist, who is not too far away from where I am actually as well today. Anna, good afternoon. Anna,
Hi,
I can't
how are
hear
you?
you. Oh, I can hear you.
Sorry, I've been
Fantastic.
having some connection problems. You
No, it's
can't hear
okay.
me.
I can hear you.
Okay,
I can
good.
hear you okay now. I think there's just a bit
Lovely.
of a delay between us. Yes, I'm very well, thank you. And how are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. I've finished all my assignments now, so just living my life at home, not really doing much, but yeah, I'm quite excited to be on the show today.
Having a well-deserved rest, Anna.
Indeed, yeah. After all the
Fantastic.
pace.
What have you learned anything sort of new or tried something different in lockdown? I know Cam's talking there about being able to see things a bit clearer and obviously lighter in terms of the effects of pollution. What about you? Are you experiencing things a little bit differently currently?
I think it's been nice actually because I've had a lot of time to sort of try out some new hobbies and stuff. Like when lockdown started, I was given up. I'm back on French. Yeah, just a little bit of everything. And so I work in a special needs school in Upminster, and they have offered us like a free sign language course, which I think I'm going to start up because I know a bit of sign language, but I'd like to know, more because I think that will support me in that role. So that's something that I might do. And
Fantastic.
Internships which are probably cancelled.
Yeah, I do feel really sorry for those that had internships, work experience, that sort of thing, all booked up, ready to go, looking forward to it, and then having, I suppose, a really empty period in your summer and in your holiday in return. Well, Anna, it's very good to talk to you today, and let's bring in someone who this might get a little bit confusing now because we're going to bring in another Johnny. Good afternoon.
Another Johnny. How you doing, Johnny? Are you good?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you. I'm on my last stretch when it comes to my essays. Just got to have a final couple of read overs, and then all ready for Wednesday. Now, Johnny, what have you been up to?
I have. It feels like to say the same old is getting a bit tired. But it has just been kind of a week to week, day to day basis thinking, is there something new I can look at today? So I'm on a gap year personally. So the kind of, I've almost tempted to say I'm jealous of my mates at uni who have that kind of pressure of work, but then I realize how much work they're doing and I'm thinking, maybe this is an easy ride. But I've been reading a lot. I'm a writer as well, I play guitar, so I'm trying to keep myself creative. and not getting distracted by every news notification that comes up. But
Yeah.
it's been nice. Yeah, the weather's been fantastic, and I've got a couple of dogs as well, so we're going on some walks. Yeah, I think taking things slow is the way I call it.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are sort of adapting and, dare I say, enjoying the slow pace of lifestyle sometimes, and you've got a big drink there to keep you going as well. Let's bring in our final panelist for today. Hello, Enoch. How are you?
Hello, Johnny. How are you? Oh,
Yes.
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good.
I love that. Enoch, what have you been up to?
Well, this week the main thing I've done is you and Johnny will know about this actually. The Cummings cast, Raw News had its own special reactions to Dominic Cummings news, and you can find that on Mixcloud and Spotify now. So if you want to go find the Cummings cast by Raw News, that's something to look into. But other than that, it's just essays. The grind of life never ceases, as they say.
Are they due soon?
Well, they were technically due in on Monday, but I got another extension on them, so it's.
So is that is that the what's it called, self-certification? Is that what it is?
Yeah, self-certification. Yeah. So.
Oh, okay. Well, you're on the final stretch with them all. Enoch, I'm glad you mentioned Dominic Cummings because it leads us nicely on to our first topic today. We're going to talk about Dominic Cummings' trip to Durham, which is in the northeast of England. And you're right to mention, Enoch, that is something we discussed extensively a little bit earlier in the week in this Cummings cast we recorded. Perhaps at this stage, Enoch, you could tell us what we know and where we're at with this.
Oh, well, I suppose so. Last Friday, the story broke that Dominic Cummings had violated lockdown rules by travelling to Durham to stay with his parents. And that obviously he lives in London most of the time. He travelled to Durham after he and his wife were seen to have coronavirus. And the story's got a bit more complicated since then, but the basic facts of the matter, as agreed by both the press and Dominic Cummings, are he went to Durham while both he and his wife were sick. He took a trip to Barnum Castle to test his eyes, as they say, and he came back to London. And it came out very recently that I think it was yesterday, the police said he had in fact broken lockdown rules by doing this. So the government said all week they hadn't broken lockdown rules. And I think that's the latest update as far as I know. The police confirmed he did break lockdown rules.
Yeah, the Durham police have said that there was a minor breach, I think is the way they described it, but they wouldn't be investigating it any further. There's so much to unpack here, but I want to start with that very peculiar press conference we had in the Rose Gardens, which is situated just behind number 10 Downing Street. And this is an area which is generally reserved for sort of functions and meetings with people. But when it comes to press conferences, it's something, special visits might take place there, prime ministerial speeches. You look back to the start of coalition government, for example. Yeah, David Cameron and Nick Clegg had their Rose Garden moment where all seemed perfect in their marriage. You look even further back, John Major, when he was the prime minister, announced he was going to step down as leader of his party there. It's quite a prestigious place to hold a press conference. He held this peculiar conference there where he turned up in jeans, and I thought that was quite something. He said he thought he behaved reasonably. He said, I don't regret what I did. He didn't consider resigning from his role, although I have heard a bit of a rumour that if he's still on the front pages of the papers by Sunday, he may decide to leave. He didn't consult the Prime Minister, but of course we know Boris Johnson was quite ill himself around that time, and then had this 60-mile round trip from his parents' home in Durham to Barnard Castle to test his eyesight, and that's where you insert the Specsavers joke. I want to see what you thought about this press conference. Coming to you first, do you think it was right that they held the press conference there? And second of all, what did you make of it?
Well, to be honest, I think everything with Dominic Cummings since he's come into Downing Street has just been unprecedented. So this press conference didn't surprise me at all that it took place. I think it's certainly out of the ordinary, but I think for Dominic Cummings and I think for the situation, I think it was important that he clarified his actions and he clarified sort of what everyone in government knew. I think it's important for a certain accountability and to maybe clear up some of the facts that were going around the press, and there were very different stories being peddled. So I think it was important for him to certainly go and do that press conference. I think certainly some quite interesting revelations, I think particularly about Barnard Castle, but I don't think the press conference moved the debate any forward apart from introducing some new information in that I think if you were pro Dominic Cummings before this started, you were going to be pro Dominic Cummings after. If you were anti Dominic Cummings before, you were going to be anti Dominic Cummings after. I think he is a man is too polarizing. I think even a small event like this and anything that comes out of it, I don't think is going to really affect how people see him.
Yeah, he certainly is a Marmite figure, but these press conferences, you can look in the minutes in the code for advisors and special advisors, and it says really that they shouldn't be making statements like this. He had the opportunity to make that press conference there. I assume sort of the wishes of the Prime Minister as well. Do you think it sets a bad example, I suppose, going forward, that special advisors hold press conferences of their own?
Well, I think this was such an extraordinary circumstance and such an extraordinary time that I think we had to break precedent. I think it was important that Dominic Cummings face the press in that way. I don't think it's something that should be set precedent for future special advisors. I just think Dominic Cummings is such a particular breed in Downing Street that I think in that circumstance it was important. But, I do very much believe in the importance of traditions and the importance of maintaining precedent. I think it's important to effective government, but I think there are some circumstances where you have to break with tradition if it's in the national interest. And I think that was one occasion where it was suitable.
Yeah, and on the actual trip to Durham itself, it's not good really when the person that, or one of the people that make the rules decides to break the rules. Were you disappointed in Dominic Cummings' actions?
Yeah, I got to say that I don't think, given that he was one of the proprietors of lockdown, we've obviously seen afterwards the news coming out of SAGE meetings that he was quite a strong proprietor of lockdown, that it did kind of seem quite contradictory and very much against his own message. But I think now, obviously, we've seen what's come through from Durham Police, where they've said it's a minor breach. They won't be investigating it further. I do think we need to start moving on from this now and looking at the wider issues of this pandemic. I think if Dominic Cummings was going to resign, I think he would have done it already. But I think we have to take a much wider look at the pandemic, really ensuring that the government can get their message home and not be distracted by a story that, from what Durham Police has said, is just now a minor breach.
Yeah, on the issue of resigning, I think you're probably onto something. Dominic Cummings doesn't strike me as the sort of person who would resign from a role like that. Anna, I want to hear your thoughts on the Dominic Cummings saga, I suppose. Do you agree with Cam, or do you think actually Dominic Cummings needs to go?
So I think it's interesting what Cam said when he said, before the press conference, if people liked Dominic Cummings, then they would probably still like him. If they didn't, they probably won't. I think that was really important, to recognise, because I don't know how much this press conference actually did for us. For me personally, when I look at a government representative, I think, if you're in power, if you're in that position, you need to really work to uphold the regulations that you put in place, because it's the same as, I don't know, for example, if you're a teacher and you work in education and you set a rule, I know I'm oversimplifying it, you set a rule, nobody's allowed to be on their phone, and then your teacher's sitting at the front of the class with your phone. For me, in that sense, I think you really need to go above and beyond to really uphold your rules if you're setting your rules or if you're a part of the government. So I think that was quite... Another thing for me was the attitude of Cummings, which is something that I quite struggle with. Like you mentioned, he turned up in jeans. He's half an hour late. He sits down like, "Oh, sorry, I'm late." And I think for some people, he is a representative of privilege don't particularly in government, and the privilege that can be taken advantage of if you're in that sort of position.
Yeah, I think when I was watching that, and we were all sort of sat around waiting, and all the rolling news channels had to sort of fill a lot of time and talk amongst each other. I couldn't help but think actually this was all part of the plan to keep us waiting, and then to turn up and sort of say sorry I'm late, and then get on with it and have this sort of peculiar attitude around things. What I think is interesting, Anna, is that actually this may have led, according, if you believe some polls, to people becoming less likely to follow the lockdown measures going forward? Do you think this has had a negative impact on the work that the government have been doing?
I think it's had a negative impact in the way that he's not being, he's not setting the right example. But at the same time, you have to expect people to make their own decisions. And if somebody's going to say, oh, well, if Dominic Cummings can go to Durham, then I can go to Durham, or I can travel this distance. That is a choice that an individual is making, and the individuals who are making those choices are adults with autonomy. You choose whether or not you want to break lockdown rules, but at the same time, I do think you need to be a good representative. It does sort of make you have a bit of an attitude about it, where you think, I, for example, I'm going to use that classic example. I haven't seen my grandparents since January, since before I went to university at the start of term 2, which is really hard for me. I'm not breaking that rule, but that's because it's a choice that I'm making. I think that's important to consider.
Yeah, and that's difficult, and we can all use our own personal experiences to see actually, the effect this has had on us. I suppose with the announcements made yesterday, we can now meet up to 6 people, and you can do that in the garden now as well. As long as you keep your distance, I suppose you can get some element of it, but it's certainly not going to be the same. Johnny, coming to you for your thoughts on this whole Dominic Cummings situation. Do you think actually he still has to resign? Do you think he perhaps might?
Did you repeat the question? Sorry, I'm just a bit of a jutter.
Do you think Dominic Cummings actually now might resign?
It's a tough one. I think everyone's kind of pointing to the weak bracket. So if the Sunday papers are still championing kind of, I think the polls the Daily Mail put out on last Sunday are in a range between 60 and 70% believing he should resign and he was lying and all the negative things. In terms of what the government strategy is now, you've just seen on the Boris Johnson's meeting with the liaison committee, a lot of it was he wanted to move on. He wanted to forget and really push on with this new policy of which I hope we'll talk about later, testing and tracing. And I think that's very much number 10's kind of method now. So I don't see any resignation coming anytime soon. The only possibility with that, with timings, is it could even be tonight. I think it was last week this time, like The Guardian and the Daily Mirror broke the story of Dominic Cummings. So if they play the press round, they release the story or some new facts that really spin Dominic Cummings' kind of turn of events against him, I really don't see a resignation coming anytime soon.
Yeah, and we know that the government is very keen to move on from this, and we certainly saw that in that committee you mentioned. Do you think the country is ready to move on?
I doubt it, because I think there is, specifically with this kind of new policy or kind of access of meeting up with 6 people, I think, again, people are stretching the boundaries that they're being put in. I think as the weather's getting nicer, people are getting sick and tired. Like the summer is truly here. I think people are, they see an easy target in Dominic Cummings doing something which is, I would say, objectively not on and not following the rules. I think that there's a lot of opinions going around thinking, well, I think we can all ourselves. So it's a tricky game the government's got playing, but there are elected officials, and we hope they can serve us well.
Yeah, and if they don't, make the right decision in the way that the country sees it, I'm sure they'll soon hear about it. Misha, what about you? Are you happy? Are you content that the Prime Minister's chief advisor in the country that governs you has broken his own rules?
I think a major factor in all of this is not just that he did objectively break the lockdown for 2 different reasons, one to go to Durham and then further on to go to the castle supposedly to test his eyesight, which I mean, cue the Specsavers joke, but the fact that they doubled down not just on the closing ranks around him, which I think is very indicative of the government's focus on more protecting themselves more than other people, but the fact that they also said that the reasons that it was okay and that he shouldn't resign because of it were because of all these detailing factors that he went on to in the press conference. I entirely agree that he should have done the press conference, because even though it's not exactly precedented for a government advisor to be in the spotlight, and obviously they're trying to get him out of it, it is good to provide some clarity. But the fact that they are saying essentially he did break it, but because of these extenuating circumstances, that him as a father, as someone who's concerned with the safety of his family, it was okay to do as a result. The fact is that so many people in this country have been in the exact same situation. Everyone has been in difficult situations. Everyone has had to make choices regarding their safety, the safety of their families, the safety of their loved ones, and people have essentially been forced to stay at home because they felt morally and legally that it was what they had to do. And so to see the government say it's okay because it was a very extreme example is acting like that's the only extreme example that's been going on in the country, when obviously it's not, especially with people who are in extremely difficult circumstances where they're living at home, maybe in a situation that might not be safe due to some sort of other domestic abuse, for example. That's just one case, and there are so many more. The point I'm trying to make is the fact that they're doubling down on the it's okay because of this makes it seem like everyone else who either stayed at home even though they had similar extreme situations either didn't have to, or that it doesn't matter that they did. And I think that's going to be a major concerning thing, and the reason that so many of the public will continue to be angry as they realize the choices they've had to make, the sacrifices they've had to endure, are not being reflected and not being done in the same way by these governmental officials.
Yeah, it certainly undermines the efforts, and they sort of said, he did what was best for his wife and child. Does that suggest then that other people in the country aren't really using their common sense in the right way? It's definitely, Misha, it's definitely weakened the government, hasn't it?
Oh, definitely. I think going forward as well, I mean, we'll be talking about test and trace later, but in an interview with Matt Hancock, I think on Sky, he was pressed on the fact that the fact of Dominic Cummings so-called using his common sense means that it's okay for other members of the public who may also have been, who, if they're affected, if they use their common sense, it's okay as well. So it really undermines what the government are saying going forward with health statements, and it's going to really cripple the actual effort that's being done. And so I think in terms of sacrifices for being worth it, I can't really see Dominic Cummings and the protection and the eagerness to try and sweep this under the rug is ultimately really going to benefit anyone other than the Conservative Party.
Yeah, it's certainly something that's going to go on for a while. Enoch, I know as head of news here at Raw, you're not allowed to express too many opinions, but it's certainly shaken things up, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, to think the government's fallen 20 points in the polls over the last week. To think that almost like a month ago, this was a government in the peak of their honeymoon period, going into a lockdown with the majority of British support behind the idea of lockdown. To think they've now this is what's cost them 20 points in the polls after we're facing massive economic austerity after this is all over is astonishing. I mean, the willingness they have to engage in this scandal that's essentially just burning political capital for no real gain is astounding to me at every turn.
Yeah, and when you get the health secretary coming out, and obviously other ministers as well, but the health secretary is someone who's been at the forefront of all of this, coming out and actually, as you say, burning some of his political capital. And I know there are some people who think he's improved as a minister throughout all of this, and they're sort of, at what cost? We do wonder. Enoch, we're going to round up this discussion on Dominic Cummings here, but there is plenty more discussion in the Cummings cast, isn't there? Just remind us where we can find that.
You can find the Cummings cast on the Raw News Spotify and, of course, the Raw News Mixcloud. The links are all on the Raw News Facebook page and Twitter account.
Okay, fantastic. We could talk about Dominic Cummings all afternoon, but I have a feeling that come this time on the show next week, it may well still be rambling on. It's been mentioned a couple of times already, this test and trace system. So it came into force yesterday at 9 a.m, so that's on Thursday. And essentially, it is the way to somehow get us out of this lockdown. So if I went to work, for example, and perhaps I was within that 2 meter distance of someone for more than 15 minutes, and then I came down with the virus, I would have to, I assume, give their contact details to the NHS. If they didn't have them already, the NHS would then call up the people I've been in close proximity with, and they'd be instructed to isolate for 14 days, and of course get a test as well, because tests are pretty widely available now. It has raised some questions when it comes to privacy and I suppose data protection as well. And whilst they say this is secure when it comes to data, I'm interested to hear the panel's thoughts on this test and trace system. I wonder if they might comply with it if they were called up. Cam, if you got a call from NHS and they said, right, you've been in contact with someone for over 15 minutes recently, you would have to isolate. Would you feel comfortable doing that?
Well, I think for the sake of public health, I think at this time in particular, I would feel comfortable. I mean, I wouldn't be something I would enjoy, definitely. I won't say that. But I think for the sake of public health, and I think for the sense of togetherness as well, that to get us through this crisis, I think we have to make sacrifices sometimes. And if it's for the long-term good, then I would be happy to do that, certainly.
And in terms of the privacy side of things, do you feel comfortable knowing that these people have your contact details? If not, I'm not 100% clear here whether you have to give your friend's contact details over. I'm not too sure. But it certainly raises some questions when it comes to privacy and how much of a role this plays in our life, especially because we're expecting at some point for an app to be rolled out with this, which will use your location settings on your phone and know where you are and know if you sat next to someone with coronavirus on the bus. It raises some worries.
Well, the government have to be responsible and the government have to reassure the public, I think, that whatever measures that they've put in place with people's data are fully complying with all the data protection regulations and that people can feel secure that in the good of public health, they can hand over their data. I think certainly one of the most interesting things I've certainly found is certainly how voluntary handing over some of your contact details may be. So in the sense that the contract tracers will want to know from you is your initiative. It may be a case that you forget. It may be a case you simply don't want to give over these people's contact details. And of course, I think one of the most interesting things that I think often gets sort of underlooked by all this is that we still don't know the percentage of people who've had coronavirus and who've had it asymptomatically. And if you don't know those numbers, you kind of can't find a ballpark figure as to people who found sort of people who've had coronavirus, but you just don't know they've had it. I think it's going to make whatever contact tracing system you've got in place really difficult to implement because it's not going to stop the community transmission as you want it to.
Yeah, I think the antibody test will be key with that. That is the
Absolutely.
have you had it test rather than have you got it in your body right now. Especially as we don't have that sort of data, Cam. Do you think actually this has been introduced a little bit too soon and it's a way for the government perhaps to try and deflect attention from everything that's going on with Dominic Cummings?
I mean, the government had a plan to start implementing and easing lockdown measures on June the 1st. We've known that since Boris did the press conference 2 or 3 weeks ago. But so I wouldn't say it's a distraction. But what I would say certainly is that I think the government are trying to sort of regain control of the crisis. I think they've sort of been found to have been floundering on that extent in the last couple of weeks. And I think they've looked to South Korea, they've looked to Germany, they've looked to countries who've had far greater relative success, and they've seen their use of their contact tracing. You know, South Korea's contact tracing system has been impeccable throughout this crisis. So if the government can reassure us they have the capacity and the ability to ensure the privacy of any data given over, then I think this is an announcement for good. And I think it's about to return us to normal, which I think this country wants to do. I think we want to start easing back to normal. I don't think we're going to go back to what it was before coronavirus, but if we can just get back to that, I think it will certainly be reassuring to know that we're getting past the worst of the crisis, or at least certainly the first wave of the crisis.
Yeah. And the last question to you on this, Cam, do you think this should have been happening throughout everything so far? Do you think actually, we had this contact tracing or some sense of contact tracing towards the start of this, and then we had this big long period where it was a bit of a free-for-all. No one knew who had the virus, who they passed it on to, especially if they were asymptomatic. Do you think actually this should have been running throughout all of our handling of the virus right from the very start?
Well, I think it goes back to a matter of capacity. We didn't have the capacity at the start of the crisis to be able to implement a much wider community transmission system. And so I think got to give the government where credit's due. They've really worked on expanding the testing capacity. and expanding a real contact tracing network over the last couple of months. So we can ensure we can implement it now. I think where the capacity wasn't there and we did have to stop it, I don't agree that we shouldn't have completely stopped it. I think we somehow lost control on that aspect. But I think certainly going forward and having this system in place, and if you look at South Korea's response to the MERS epidemic 5 years ago and the way they've implemented what they've learned from that with the coronavirus, I think it's something that we can certainly be really encouraged by and really see that the government can keep control and keep on top of this.
Yeah, and we of course all look over to other countries and their handling, not just of this virus but other viruses too, and perhaps take some a leaf out of their books. Misha, do you feel comfortable with the government and the NHS and those sort of institutions having all this personal data?
I think it will ultimately depend on what data they're ultimately going to have and how it's going to be stored. I mean, we're talking about having access to individuals' information such as email addresses and phone numbers as a way of contacting people, which is bad enough. But then when you're talking about literally keeping a trace of the data surrounding where you're going and who you're interacting with, particularly as that itself has limitations in terms of how you're interacting with people who may have accidentally given you coronavirus because of, well, proximity can't be traced with things like walls and levels and barriers in between on a proximity app. But I think it is ultimately going to be a real concern for a lot of people how this information is going to be stored and how ultimately it's going to be distributed to different individuals, particularly as such a service is probably open for people who are looking to scam users in order to affect them malware by sending them and calling them and saying they're from the NHS and trying to affect them that way. So I think it does need to be guaranteed that both people's security and safety can be guaranteed online and that this data isn't going to be stored and later used in some other method.
Do you think this is all being introduced too late and actually this contact tracing, the test and trace, which the government are talking a lot about at the moment, do you think this should have been running throughout all of this virus?
Ultimately, I know most likely would have done a huge amount of good if I had been doing it. I don't know personally if the technology and the software was available in order to have that trace fully open, and I'd rather wait until it was done in such a way that didn't actually exacerbate the problem rather than actually help. But ultimately, it's something that we should have had in place as a way of ensuring that people, not even just that are aware if they may have come into contact, but are more actively thinking and it's more focused in their brain about how it may be effective and how close in proximity they may be to other people to spread it out.
Yeah, and it's important when it comes to all this, contact details, and at the moment I suppose they're calling people up and emailing them. But when things progress, which we expect them to, with the app, which we know has been trialled on the Isle of Wight, would you feel comfortable having that app on your phone and knowing that the government has control and access, I suppose, to all of your whereabouts?
I think those are two very different matters. Would I be comfortable with an app that I knew was specifically just restricted to NHS people who were able to use it as a way of determining whether or not I or people around me were at risk? I would be comfortable with that. But the idea that it was then being used and then the security data was maintained and remembered by government usage, I would feel far less secure about, because I'm not entirely sure what it's going to mean. And I'm someone who, for the most part, may not be affected. I imagine there are a lot of other people who may be a lot more concerned about how their data is being used and how that may affect decisions being made with them, and in turn, if they're directly relating to government actions.
Yeah, I think we'll have to see how it's used, and the question is how much control, once the virus goes, and we all hope for that day, don't we? How much control the government retains, especially when it comes to this app. Enoch, let's come to you. I know you're in a slightly noisy environment, so if it gets too loud, we'll come back and go back to you. Would you feel be comfortable having that contact tracing app on your phone?
I'm not, obviously you always have to be very careful when you're giving any sort of access, the government any sort of access to your own personal sort of technology. I do think in this one particular instance, just because it's the level of panic we're in, I do think it is necessary. I'm worried about what's going to happen after the pandemic's over and the sort of system we're going to have to need afterwards, whether or not that's going to stay in place. I do think another big problem I have with the app is that instead of using the more decentralized app lots of other countries are using, we've sort of went away and tried to make our own. I'm not sure how well it's working out, especially if you look at the trials in Isle of Wight and how well they're going.
Yeah, and I suppose we won't know how well they're going until they're done, and we learn a little bit more about it. What about the argument that this has all been brought in a few days ahead of time? It's brought in on the 28th of May instead of on the 1st of June on Monday, that it's all been brought in to deflect away from this row about Dominic Cummings?
I don't see how it's an argument. I feel like it's so obviously true that it can't. Even I, as someone who has to say relatively impartial, feels like it's something that has to be stated. They kind of got introduced on June the 1st. This actually, Raw News is doing an interview with someone, a contact tracer, who's discussing how they were told the plans changed. It's very clear the government was not intending to launch at all until next week. Even next week was optimistic on their end. So it's very clearly been advanced enough to help change the story.
Yeah, I've heard some people were sort of told on Wednesday night that they were going to start on Thursday morning. Yeah. Wow, I look forward to hearing that interview. When's it going to be out?
Hopefully this Monday. Hopefully, because it was supposed to be getting ready for the actual launch, but now obviously that's all been sped up. So this Monday it should be out. Yeah.
Okay, well I look forward to it. Anna, what about you? Do you feel comfortable with the government tracking where you've been and when you're going?
I think it's a difficult thing, because I think it's always really, really important that we do question what's going on. You know, don't just accept and think, oh, the government are doing this for good and not going to use my details for, you know, for negative influences. But at the same time, I think it's really hard because these are exceptional circumstances, and I think at the most basic level, this app exists for the sake of, you know, bettering the community and helping people and stopping this virus from spreading in the most basic sense. So I personally am comfortable, first of all, because I'm not really concerned about what the government, you know, with my whereabouts. I'm literally staying in the house and not doing anything. But I do understand that there will be people that are concerned, and I do understand, you know, that there might be issues at stake afterwards. But I do think in the most basic instance, this app is something which could be valuable, and even if it brings down sort of percentages of people who are spreading the virus, that is a good thing in my eyes.
Yeah, and I suppose it's a way out of it, and then we can start to tell where the virus is and where it's spreading to. And we've heard a bit of talk about local lockdowns. So they may say, right, that town or city that you're in, that will become a lockdown area whilst we try and hold down the virus a little bit. And that is really, Anna, the way out of it, isn't it? To take a bit more of a local approach, because we know that this virus doesn't behave the same way across the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important. I know particularly in London and around London, there have been higher instances, and, you know, people still having to being asked to come into work and things like that. And I think it is important that we do consider the individual sort of relations that people are having and how these are working to spread or prevent the virus from being spread. And I think this is also really important, the track and trace, test and trace, because you know, it might help to get some people back into work. It might help to sort of reopen some industries, which is a good thing, and not do so in a way that is harmful and will promote the spread of the virus. I think the intention behind the app is certainly a good thing, but I do think we need to, you know, keep a critical mindset when we're thinking.
Johnny, what do you make of this app? When it comes, is it something you're going to download?
I wouldn't say I'd rush through it straight away, but I think it with like anything in desperate times, it's a high risk and hopefully it's a high reward. Again, it's such early days, and you can't possibly say definitively that this will be the saving grace out of this crisis we've won. But it's definitely a start, and I think that while it is very easy to say it is kind of a cover up for all the Dominic Cummings fiasco, I think it is something tangible, something proactive for the government to put out there and say to the public to react and say, okay, this is something we can use, and hopefully it will affect, you know, a positive change around you know, the population. But again, it's risky in terms of a data protection issue. I think the legal precedent behind that would be, again, the key word, but unprecedented. I think to have a massive risk like that, I think it is something I think the press and the public needs to keep an eye on. But equally, it's something new, something to give it to try.
Unprecedented seems to be the word of the moment. Just quickly, Johnny, time's against us, and I want to move on. But do you think actually that the government has been a bit too slow to bring this in, and it should have been with us throughout this crisis?
Sorry, I just missed that. I think my Wi-Fi.
Do you think the government has been too slow to bring this in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think even the stages that Matt Hancock was talking about yesterday on BBC, it seems like the only thing they needed to get up, if this whole policy to be introduced earlier, is just testing numbers. And I think there's even a discrepancy with if they even hit that 100,000 tests a day. I think it was at the end of April. If they even got that, and just having a higher testing capacity, this policy could have been introduced weeks and weeks before. And I think it's we're going to have to wait and see if it's an effective policy from the get-go. I heard that reports like nearly 50% of people trying to log on to apply for tests, it shut down. So it is a massive guessing game. But equally, yeah, if it was introduced earlier, you could say this would have been a bit of a saving grace. But I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, there was that 100,000 target by the end of April. The government say they met it towards the end of April, but a lot of those tests hadn't been administered. They've just been sent out in the post. There was also talk that at the start of this, it was 100,000 people tested, not 100,000 tests. A lot of people get a multiple test. And we know their target for May, which we're coming to the end of, is 200,000 tests a day. This has never been met. And the day to meet that is on Sunday. I suppose we'll get the figures on Monday, but it does seem that they're sort of aiming for that one day to hit it on the one day. So they've got the positive headline and then actually not making the effort throughout the rest of the month. Anyway, we've got to move on. I want to talk about Donald Trump. He's had some of his tweets marked as fake news, and also another one we heard today that's been sort of labelled as a violent tweet. It's all relating to these protests in Minneapolis after the killing of George Floyd, just yet another black person killed by a white police officer, and it clear that they really, hadn't done anything wrong and didn't deserve to be killed, of course. I want to focus really here on Donald Trump's relationship with the social media giant Twitter. It's a platform really which has made him who he is. He's the president that tweets every 5 minutes. He's got his phone on him. We know that for many years of the Obama administration, he wasn't even allowed a phone and access to social media in that sense. It's quite a dangerous thing, I suppose, for a president to have. Misha, looking at all of this and the really horrible things that have taken place in America, not just over the past few days, but over time, we know this is a real systemic problem there. And Donald Trump's relationship with social media. Do you think the president has taken the right course of action over the past couple of days?
Sorry, could you repeat the end of the last question? It got a bit jarbled.
That's okay. I know we're having some connection issues today. Do you think the president, has taken the right course of action over the past couple of days?
Absolutely not. I mean, reading the tweets that he called about, saying that, to quote, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, generally advocating for people to go out and start shooting at these people, not just police and military members, but private citizens in America who have been inspired by that. It is ultimately really alarming and scary for him to so blasé casually send that out. And I think it's completely right that it's tagged as being advocating for extreme levels of violence. And it also goes to show the comparison between his response to the armed protesters, the armed white protesters who were storming Capitol buildings. And he said that the governor should, talk to them and try and put out the fire with that. But with these groups, that he's immediately calling them violent and thuggish. That's the word he used. So I think it's absolutely just going to stir up more things, and I don't think we could have expected any less that from someone who in their first year of office called neo-Nazis and white supremacists very fine people. And in regards to the idea of trying to interact with Twitter he accused them of censoring him, and this sort of like, oh, it's this big company trying to censor individual free speech. I think that's a completely that's completely reframing the story in a way it isn't. This isn't a case of free speech. It's a case that if he's posting things that were deliberately or evidently untrue or mistruth or anything you like, and he ought to be held account, because people are going to look at him, going to look at the office and position he holds, and read that as truth as a result. And if he's spreading misinformation, I think the initial tweet that got this all started was about sending ballots into the election, and the fact that he said that it would immediately call to vote for when this hasn't been demonstrated and isn't the case. I think it's entirely right for companies to be, well, for Twitter and for social media companies that do make a lot of money and do benefit from all the spread of like media information and news that's posted and spread online, to be able to point out and call things out when it's being done to deliberately mislead people.
Yeah, I mean, it's surely some step in the right direction of Twitter starting to label things as, as fake news and the like. Cam, what's your thoughts on this, on Donald Trump and his relationship with Twitter? There is some talk that he might use some legislative action, perhaps some sort of executive order against Twitter. Do you think that would be the right thing for him to do?
Well, I think for him to impose an executive order on Twitter, I think it's going to be extremely difficult. Twitter is a globally operating company, and it will probably be able to find ways to operate differently in different countries. So, for example, me reading a tweet by Donald Trump in the UK may be able to get, different access, if that is the case, into the US. But I think certainly, I think it's kind of a two-way relationship that I think is failing on all sides. I think we shouldn't be regulating the press, and we shouldn't be enforcing too much regulation on social media. I think it's sort of a tenet to our democracy that these companies can operate freely. But I think at the same time, I don't think Twitter should really be being proactive and being seen to be politicizing events like with Donald Trump, for example. And now Donald Trump has always been one with a very flagrant use of his words. But I think it has to be careful sometimes that it doesn't be seen to be too far or too leaning into conservative commentators or conservative politicians, and sort of not taking such a strong attitude on liberal politicians, even if that's sort of inadvertent, if that is perceived to be the case. I think Twitter needs to be more careful looking at that.
Yeah, and Cam, you're saying there, really, that it shouldn't be regulated too much. I suppose that all comes back to free speech and everything. But Johnny, Twitter's a bit of a hotbed for fake news.
I think and no one knows that better than the president himself. I think there's nothing surprising in this reaction to something that he has said that can easily be taken as quite outlandish and quite generally, it's his reaction is not surprising. It's petulant. It's quite ridiculous. And his push for legislative power, as in this executive order he wants to publish, he's got his priorities wrong. I think the people in Minneapolis who are protesting, and arguably have gone to dangerous limits. I think looting and any action of arson is applicable, but to add, lack of a better term, fire to the fire, and him reacting so badly to Twitter, objectively following their guidelines. If he's using their app, he has to adhere to their guidelines as a company and as a platform that he uses to push his political agenda.
Yeah, in the same way that if I went on Twitter and started posting fake or violent news, I would probably expect for it to be taken down. Anna, what's your thoughts on Donald Trump's actions over the past few days?
Hi, sorry, I had bad connection, so if I repeat anyone's points, I apologise because I didn't hear everything that everyone said. But with regards to Trump and trying to regulate Twitter, for me, it's problematic. First of all, because Twitter doesn't belong to the government; it's not really his position to regulate it. And also, I think by enforcing certain regulations upon, or trying to persuade freedom of speech, what he's doing is he's sort of controlling a media outlet, which is one of the most popular media outlets to communicate with such a wide sort of scope of the public. And in my opinion,
We haven't got the best connection with Anna. Enoch, I'd like to hear your thoughts on
tweet, for example, where he
actions over the
was
past few days. Sorry, Anna.
accused of
I'm getting a bit of you, but I'm going to go to
I don't
Enoch.
know if I've disappeared.
Well, I think honestly, when I saw the tweet Donald Trump put out about the sort of the riots in Minnesota, where he quoted all that racist old sheriff, not police commissioner from the 1960s, where he said, "When they start looting, we start shooting." I thought that. I honestly thought, okay, this has crossed the line, and Twitter has to do something about it. And when they did, I will admit, I was happy to do something about it, because that was, in sort of especially in these very tense times, a complete mistake from the president. But I think if the president starts to repeat, because in particular, he wants to put an executive order out to repeal part of an older law that basically says internet companies are not liable for the content published on their website, even if they do regulate part of it. So now, if Twitter makes any move to regulate anything on their platform, they're now liable for everything published on that platform, which I think is absurd, because when you have a social media network, it just simply cannot work that way and continue to exist. And I know for a fact Donald Trump doesn't want to destroy Twitter, because that man has more data Twitter than I am, which is saying something. So it's just, yeah. So I'm just baffling, an absolutely baffling move on his part.
Yeah, he's a president that never fails to surprise us, isn't he? We've lost Anna. Hold on, I think Anna might be coming back. We'll see about that in a second. With just a few minutes left of the show, and thank you all for being here so much. But at the moment, of course, we're doing all this studying at home and everything, and I'm just interested, really, to see how it's going and how you're finding home studying. Cam?
Well, it's certainly been a struggle. I mean, certainly having the less resources and obviously not being on campus, I think it's certainly been a struggle. But for me, it's been about, making sure I take, regular breaks, I develop a good routine, and I give myself other things to do. So the alternative view, for example, was something I set up, always wanted to do it, but I thought lockdown, this is the perfect time to start something new. So I've got an alternative to that. So yeah, every Tuesday, 3 to 4 p.m., that's my little break from the work, and I think it's worked so far for me. So definitely, I think that's how I've been getting through lockdown.
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad you got the opportunity to promote it, and that's on Tuesday. We'll be watching that. It's a fantastic new addition to the Raw News schedule. Misha, I know you said you finished your dissertation now. How did you find it doing it from home?
It was more stressful than I thought it would be. Obviously, there are different scenarios for everyone who's working at home at the moment. One thing I found quite difficult was a lot more restrictions on the resources I was able to access. For example, there were quite a few books that are only available in print from the library that I was needed to get out and research. I had notes that summarize some of the points and few things, but with some quotes that I specifically needed to manage. And as a result, because they were only available in print and not online, it kind of did restrict my access to a couple of texts, and then also my ability to meet up as much time I want with tutors and work in a slightly less chaotic environment. I won't go into too much details, but let's say I definitely missed the silence of the first floor and the library at times. But ultimately, it's just a case of having a clear objective in mind. You have to do X number of words by this date, or you have to keep in mind what you need to do, and just try and maintain a communication with any tutors and asking for specific details about what you need or what their opinion on any particular project that you're doing.
Yeah, and we're all starting with what's best for us. Oh, I was just about to go to Anna, and now I can't see her. Enoch, final word of the show comes to you then. How's things been?
I mean, if you can sort of hear my background, you can probably tell work from home is not going great. But just have to keep trying. You have no alternative really. And also, I find still engaging with society stuff, like doing the news shows, still doing Raw stuff, still going on to virtual socials. Those really helped keep me, sort of de-stress and help keep me focused on work when I have to do it. So that's all I say is don't give up doing things that are fun, even if you have to work at home.
Yeah, and whilst we're with you, Enoch, as this show comes to an end, there's a plethora of Raw News shows for people to access over the coming weeks, aren't there?
Yeah. So tomorrow, obviously at 10 a.m, there's Newsant, the sort of more comedic Raw News show hosted by Scott. Then in the afternoon, we have the Raw Sports Quarren stream, which is always, even for me, a person who's never watched a single game of football in my life, it's always just fun to watch Josh Sims sort of talk with his guests. It's always a great time. Then on Monday, of course, Insight is back this week. We are going to have a full Insight Dominic Cummings, whatever else comes up over the weekend. And then Alternative View is on Tuesday, as always. It's always a great show. And of course, how can I forget Front Page News with Noah Keat, Monday at 10 o'clock. Absolutely best way to start your week every single time.
I love the Raw Sport one because they all have their gaming headsets.
Yeah, no, they have,
cracks me up every time.
Yeah, it always feels like they're like actually preparing to like commentate on a match. It's always great.
It's fantastic. Look, we're at our hour, so that's where we'll leave it. Panel, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks to Anna as well, who he seems to have lost. Do stay well and have a lovely weekend.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having me on.
Cheers, Johnny.
You've been watching the Johnny Jenkins Show here on Raw 12:51 a.m. and on Facebook and Twitter and all the other places that it's been. It's been good to talk to you this afternoon, and we'll be back next week.